What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, we get to talk about Hogwarts Legacy yet again, but in a pretty negative way. Now, look, I'm not actually as mad as I think I would have been, maybe in other circumstances. Maybe I'm not as mad as you might expect me to be, but it still does show, like, WB, things are falling apart, right? And it does give me worry, I guess, for the continued future there. They just don't know what's going on. But in terms of what we're talking about right here, with this Definitive Edition being canceled, DLC being canceled, there's a part of me that does hate that. We'll talk about that. But there's a part of me that thinks, you probably shouldn't have been doing this in the first place. Or one of the biggest problems with this entire situation is that you have lost a lot of time. Because no matter how few people you might have had on this project, you have wasted time. You've wasted those people's time, and those people could have been helping Hogwarts Legacy 2. So however much this would have delayed Hogwarts Legacy 2 coming out, you just used up all that time for nothing. So the report here is from Bloomberg, and it's an interesting one because the DLC was never confirmed, right? It was reported by Bloomberg and by Jason Schreier. The canceling of these things was never confirmed because the original was never confirmed. Does that make sense? So all of this has been speculation, but it comes from the most trusted of sources. It comes from the person who broke the news of Wonder Woman being canceled and Monolith being shut down, and I'm pretty sure that's how, the developers, they had found out, earlier that day. Some of them had found out, during that article. So there's no reason to distrust. If people know who Jason Schreier is, the guy knows his stuff. He's more in tune than anybody else on the planet in terms of this stuff. So I believe him. It's just, you hate to see it in a certain extent. So what he says is that, they were working on story DLC, and this story DLC was going to be tied into what would have been a definitive edition, or back in the day would have maybe been called a Game of the Year edition. Okay. Now what's interesting is you actually read the article, which I did a quick little scan of before I recorded. There's actually a little bit of detail on, why they canceled it, or at least a belief of why, and then what it maybe was going to be that I'll talk about in a second. So let's just read those quick little excerpts, and then we'll finish off this video. So they say Warner canceled the project this week in part due to concerns that the amount of content was not substantial enough to justify the price being considered, speaking anonymously because they were not authorized to talk to the press. And then you also have what it was going to be. Avalanche was working on a planned expansion with London-based Rocksteady Studios, which developed last year's failed Suicide Squad game. Part of the plan was to restore a storyline tied to one of the original game's companions that was cut during development. So that part is not really being talked about, maybe a little bit too nerdy to be, posted on Twitter and all these different things. But okay, to the first point, right? I wonder what was going on there. And this, again, I think about WB Greed, and I think about all the stuff that's kind of happened there. Was this going to be a 5-hour expansion that they were going to charge $40 for? And here's the thing. I want to say the answer is yes. I want to assume. And I look, at this point, I think it's safe to kind of assume whatever we want because this is something that we're never going to get. I think it's safe to assume, and I've talked about this before, why are they doing this in the first place, right? Why would they make a Game of the Year Definitive Edition version of Hogwarts 2 years after it comes out? Most times you don't do that. The best you get is when you do an Elden Ring and you have the expansion, and that's almost a second game, okay? And that is years later, and it does cost a pretty penny, right? I think it was $40, but it's worth it because it's like an Elden Ring 1.5. That's kind of the most extreme example of what you get. Firstly, most expansions come pretty soon after the game, right? They don't wait 2 years. They normally wait 3, 6, 9, 12 months, okay, somewhere in the first year. And then, they can range. There's definitely, DLCs or season passes back in the day. Some of these things can range from $40 to $60, right? They can get kind of over the top. But, they can be multiple, layers, multiple kind of rollouts of these things. There can be all sorts of stuff that goes on, right? But for something that comes out years and years later, always did. You can watch all the videos I've talked about this game. Always came across, not like Avalanche is the greedy one. They're doing their job. They go into work, they're doing what they're told, and they do a great job. But it really feels like WB is saying, okay, Suicide Squad failed, right? We just freaking shut down Monolith. Everything's failing. we need money. We need to have like a slam dunk hit, and Hogwarts is a slam dunk hit. So what we're going to do is we want you to do just the quickest of DLCs, the quickest of, enhancements, almost like the most discounted remaster type thing you can do, and then throw in a couple quests, right? And we'll call it a definitive edition, and we'll charge people $40 for it. And I've always speculated that, but I really feel like that's what was going to happen because, well, we know single player was going to be in it, but it seems like, okay, to that first point, so they didn't think that what they were adding was actually going to justify the price. Did they want 50? Not, when I say they, by the way, not Avalanche, like WB. Did they want 50? Did they want 40 and it just wasn't going to be much? Did they want 60 for it? Was there going to be no like upgrade path if you had the original version? Like what were they planning? I'm actually interested now. I actually really want to know what the plan was because it might have looked terrible and this might have actually saved them, to a degree. Now, again, the flip side of things, because we've talked about like, the possibility of this actually happening, as I keep saying, I guess the one big negative, while also looking at it as a positive, it's like, well, you never really needed to do this. And I think that's true. I'm going to agree with myself, on that one. But also, you were doing it. You were working on it. So like all that time, all that effort, all that manpower, and all that money is just, well, that's what happens, when you cancel a project is all of those resources, which includes time, is thrown out the window. So like that's, I was always questioning like, why would you do it in the first place being so many years later? I always assumed it was for like a quick buck for WB, but it's like, hey, even if 50, 60 people were working on it, it was probably more, but even if you had 50 or 60 people, and they spent a year and a half working on this, they could have been working on Hogwarts Legacy 2. Now, does that actually hurt it? Is Hogwarts Legacy 2 coming out 2 years later than expected now? I don't think so, but, maybe you could have had it a couple months earlier if none of this ended up happening, right? Just bad resource management, just not very good there. And then as to that companion one, I almost wonder if it was Sebastian. I mean, you have more than just him as a companion, but he was so integral, and obviously a lot of speculation when that game came out. Like his plot line very much felt connected to the main one, and it felt like maybe at some last minute thing, or originally he was connected. His plot was part of the central story plot, and then at some point, maybe towards the end, maybe they separated. We were told that is not true. Okay, we were outright told that's not the case, but it just felt like that. Again, you had other characters besides him, but he was the real standout one. So I almost wonder, if they were going to bring him back to do something with. So that's just kind of interesting. A look behind the curtain. We don't know for sure, but there we go. So they've completed. I mean, what else is there for them to do, really? Because they've done so much work in terms of completely collapsing their company. I'm sure they can do more, and I'm sure we'll see it. I just, he does say Hogwarts Legacy 2 is unaffected. They're still working on Hogwarts Legacy 2. I just pray, that stays that way, because this is a company that I feel like at any moment can really just decide to what they would think is course correcting, which would mean like massive, changes. They could do that like any day of the week. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure as always you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.